side of the Sea of Galilee into Galilee proper, avoiding Samaria altogether. The reason they would do that was because in order to get from Jerusalem to Galilee, there was hill country all through that. So it was easy just to go down to the river, walk along the banks of the river, and come in to Galilee. So one of the reasons was it was just easier to go by the Jordan. But there was another more powerful, dynamic reason why Jesus didn't have to go through Samaria. The reason Jesus wouldn't have gone through Samaria typically is because there are Samaritans in Samaria. And you say, what's the problem with that? Samaritans, if you don't know, were originally part of God's chosen people. And they were exiled, just like those that lived in Jerusalem, to either Assyria and Babylon in the period of the exile, either around 722 or 587, depending on if they were a part of the northern or southern kingdom, and they were exiled to Assyria and Babylon. Now, God had told his people through the prophets, you are not to marry Assyrians and Babylonians. Now, this had nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with the fact that if you marry an Assyrian or a Babylonian, you have to decide who you're going to worship. You have to decide, am I going to worship the Most High God, or am I going to worship the gods of the Assyrians and the Babylonians? It had nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with who do you worship. Those that intermarried with Assyrians and Babylonians came back and settled in Samaria, while those that didn't intermarry came and settled in the area around Jerusalem. So those that were that did not intermarry and kept their Jewish culture the way it was supposed to be, at least in their minds, they did not like Samaritans at all. They thought they were less than human. They didn't even rise to human. They were degraded, they were devalued, they were culturally ridiculed. They had no place, they felt, in God's kingdom. So Jesus having to go through Samaria just makes no sense. In order for the scripture to say Jesus had to go to Samaria, Jesus had to have a plan. Jesus literally went out of his way, taking the most difficult physical route, taking the most culturally filled with minefield route to get to Galilee. So, the disciples begrudgingly follow Jesus through these ranges, and they're getting tired, and they find themselves at Jacob's well, and Jesus is tired as well. Jesus says, I want you guys, we're going to have a picnic. I want you guys to go into town. I want you to find some food, and we're going to have a picnic together whenever you get back. They say, okay. While they're off on this trip to town, a woman comes. The Bible says it's the 6th hour. We know this to be at approximately noon. She's coming alone in the middle of the day in a hot desert country. She doesn't come in the morning or the evening when the other women come. It was common for women to come in those times of day because those were the times when it was cooler and it was easier to carry the water jar. No, she comes in the middle of the day by herself when she knows there's going to be no one else at the well. She's approaching the well and she sees this man who looks Jewish to her, which was unusual. Maybe he's lost. Jews don't come around these parts. But Jesus sees her. A woman who was likely coming to the well that day at this specific time because she was alone. Have you ever been in a crowd and felt alone? If you're in a crowd and you feel alone, you would almost rather not be in a crowd and be alone because that almost feels better, doesn't it? That was this woman. She feels this way because she's been married 5 times, been divorced 5 times. 5 men have told her friends this woman isn't worth spending time with. The only people that she can get to live with are people that are men that have other agendas, if you will, for her. A devalued, demoralized, demeaned woman comes to the well in the middle of the day. She sees this Jesus there. about a lot of things. That's one of the challenges of this passage. There is so much I could preach about today. I could do one of three things. I could preach the whole text, which would mean we'd be here at about 2, which I'm not going to do. I could break the thing up into a bunch of different messages, which I'm not going to do, or I could focus on a few specific things, which is what I'm going to do. We're with Jesus at a well, so I'm going to touch on these three encounters that Jesus had at the well. But you need to know there's this conversation about living versus physical water. There's this conversation about what does it mean to engage in worship. The Jews said, if you really want to worship God, you have to come to Jerusalem. The woman says, well, didn't Jacob worship here? Didn't our forefathers worship here? It seems to me the Jews don't have it right on this one. And Jesus says, well, you're correct. They don't. I'm ushering in a new worship, and you need to be aware of that. And she's like, okay. But despite the fact she was Samaritan, despite the fact that she was giving birth to Samaritans, which was worse than not being Jewish, despite the fact that she had been married and divorced 5 times, despite the fact that she was not married to the man she was living with, and despite the fact that everybody in town had abandoned her as having no value except men with an agenda, Jesus goes out of his way to meet her. Jesus goes the hard route, the route with all these cultural minefields in them, just to meet this woman. I've been mooring at a bone here these last few weeks. That we've been engaged in this ashes to fire time together. I do not want you to come to July, when this is all, at the end of June, when this is all done, the ashes to fire part anyway, and be the same person you are today. The point of our engaging in these spiritual exercises is not so we can come to June and be the same people we are when we started. Jesus wants to change our life every single day. And I have this sneaky suspicion that there are some that come to church week after week, and there's the pretense of religion. There's the pretense of faith. There's a pretense of relationship with Jesus, when on the inside there's ongoing habitual sin. Individuals that have given up on faith. Individuals that have abandoned hope. Individuals that come to church like the woman at the well, and they feel like they're alone, they feel like they're hopeless, they feel like they don't have a place, they feel like maybe Jesus isn't even interested in meeting with them whenever they get here. But Jesus is not shocked by your hidden sin. He's not shocked by your unbelief. As hard as you've tried to keep secrets from Jesus, He knows what's going on, and I'm pretty sure He knows a few things about you that you don't even know. You've been struggling for so long, you wonder, does Jesus love me anymore? Has Jesus given up on me? If I was at the well that day, coming at noon so no one else would see me, would Jesus talk to me? Folks, Jesus didn't have to go to Sychar. Jesus didn't have to go to Jacob's well. He chose to go there because He wants to meet with you. He wants to change your life. Jesus didn't go to all this trouble so that woman could walk away from the well that day unchanged. How many of you are in marching band? Raise your hand a little higher. You 4 right here? All right. You have the distinct privilege of having 2 of your band directors behind you. Mr. Wolf and Mr. Schwartz are back there. Now, I grew up an athlete. I didn't have much appreciation for band people whenever I was growing up. My brother makes fun of me for being on the band boosters, okay? That's how athlete-driven we were growing up. I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me. If I know now what I knew about band, if I knew then what I know now about band, I would have been in the band. It's just too cool. Now, I've had in this whole thing, whenever you 2 got into band, I was like, well, if my 2 are getting into band, I need to get into band. Because because I want to be involved in what my kids are involved in. So that meant I signed up for band boosters and got involved with the band boosters. That meant I got to meet these 4 guys. Then Mr. Schwartz, Mr. Vera, Mr. Wolf with hair, and Mr. Wolf without hair, as they are affectionately known. Now Mr. Drain. I would go to practices like most new parents would, and they'd park, about there, and they'd watch what was going on. You guys see them pull in, don't you? Wonder what's going to happen. One thing, these guys give up a month of their summer early to wait around in pitted grass in the hottest period of the summer to listen to you play your instruments. What would possess somebody to do that, is what I wanted to know. What made these men tick? Here's what I've never seen happen. I've never seen you guys put on a poor practice, and Mr. Wolf goes out to you and says, Elizabeth, Tori, Amy, Beth, that was horrible. But I want you to know I'm okay with that. If you want to settle for second best, I'm good with that. If you don't want to give it your best, you know what? I'll give up golf for you to not realize your best. I'll give up vacation time for you to not realize your best. I will do everything in my power to help you settle for mediocrity. Mr. Wolf ever say that? Yeah, right. Mr. Schwartz ever say that? I'll tell you what I have seen them do. I have seen them get off of wherever it is they are standing and walk beside you. Show you where you're supposed to start, where you're supposed to end, how it is you're supposed to get there, and they'll even show you how to walk to how to get there. Am I right? They believe that they are there to call out the best that is in you. And I have never seen them fail in that endeavor. They call out your best, right? That is what they are gifted at doing. Now, here's the question for you. If Mr. Schwartz, Mr. Drain, Mr. Wolf, and Mr. Wolf care that much to bring the best out in you, don't you think Jesus would want to do that? Don't you think that Jesus came to the well to meet the woman that day because he cared passionately about bringing out the best that was in her? She had not been realizing God's best for her. She had settled and settled and settled and settled and settled and settled. Jesus says, I've got something more for you. Here's the question. Jesus has done everything in his power to give you every opportunity possible to realize freedom from everything that holds us captive. Have you seized that moment? His power has more power than your unbelief. His power has more to do in your life than your desire to settle for second best. His power is bigger than your desire to settle for second best. His power is greater than your unbelief. And Jesus can change your life. That's the message. But I've been grinding this bone. I've been mooring on this bone, gnawing on this bone. Jesus can change your life. There's another encounter that I would have loved to have seen. Jesus is wrapping up this conversation with this woman at the well. And he looks up and he sees the disciples coming back. Now I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall of that well. I would have loved to have been a bug in the shopping bag with the disciples. Because the disciples are coming toward the well, and they see Jesus talking to a Samaritan woman. And I can almost hear Peter say, what in the world is he doing now? Can Jesus just give us a break here for a minute? I mean, He asks us to follow him, not down to the Jordan River and take the easy route. He asks us to follow him through Samaria to Galilee. He asks us to go to town and have a conversation with Samaritans. He asks us to go to town and take what little money we have and give it to Samaritans. He asks us to come back